Hello and welcome to the concluding session of the NLF Imaginary Lines Book Club for Children with Veera Hiranandani around her book, The Night Diary. We hope you've been enjoying reading the book and that it's given you a lot to think about. We trust that you've been able to read it till the entry of August 19th, 1947, as we discussed during the session last time. We also realize that we may have new members in the audience today who didn't join us for the previous session. For their benefit and to serve as a reminder for all of us, here are a few housekeeping rules. You can ask your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you raise your virtual hand, we would not be able to attend to your question. Hence, we recommend that you use the Q&A box to share your questions with us. In fact, if you already have questions ready for Veera, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box right away so that we can choose from these for Veera to answer when we begin the Q&A segment in a few minutes. We will be putting up a few polls during the webinar in order to engage with you further and would love for you to participate in the same. And now, without further ado, may I invite Veera Hiranandani to read from a portion of the Night Diary for us. Over to you, Veera.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here again. It's really exciting to be able to be here from far away and connect with you guys about the Night Diary. So I am going to start with a reading that's at the end of the section that many of you have read. And it's August 19th, 1947, that entry where they're waiting in Kazi's cottage, hiding because it wasn't safe for them to travel. And so they're just kind of waiting so they can go very early in the morning. And so it brings up, I'll talk a little bit more about it after and then get to your questions because that's always my favorite part of any session. But that idea of a lot of people sort of not quite seeing what is ahead of them when they're going through a crisis, and how can you really know? We can see some of those parallels right now in what we're going through with the pandemic, but just not really knowing what's ahead. And I think a lot of people during partition felt that they could stay or that they would leave for a short time and return. So that's sort of the idea that's in play here in this section. August 19th, 1947. Dear Mama, there are 2 rooms in Kazi's cottage, a front room with a small kitchen and a little table with 2 chairs in the middle. Then there's the back room with his bed, a rug, a chair in the corner, and a small chest of drawers. There's a small tapestry that hangs on the wall of the front room, and that's it. We spent yesterday in the back room being quiet, reading and drawing, and hoping no one came to hurt us. Our house stood dark and empty. Now we had no carriage and could only take what we could carry on our backs. We would have to leave your painting with Kazi. Papa was worried about the water. Daddy said it was too heavy and that she didn't need much. Papa made us carry extra anyway. We sat on the floor with our backs against the walls. Amil and I on one side, Papa and Daddy on the other. It was strange not being allowed to speak. Suddenly all I wanted to do was talk. I wondered if that's how normal children feel all the time. I wanted to ask Papa how he felt about leaving this house and the hospital. I wanted to ask him if he was scared. I wanted to ask him if we were ever coming back. Amal and I had short whispering conversations, but then Papa would put his finger over his mouth and an hour would go by and we wouldn't speak. My mouth itched with words. Would Papa really hear us? Would people really hear us talking? But I didn't dare cross Papa. I kept hoping we would somehow get to stay. We would sleep in Kazi's cottage for a few days and then quietly move back into our house. The hope I felt made the hours a little shorter and pulled me along. Kazi sat outside guarding the house. I longed to sit with him. Kazi and Papa made a plan. Kazi would knock 3 times on the door if he sensed danger, and we were all supposed to climb out the back window and run to the garden behind Kazi's cottage. I couldn't to the garden shed behind Kazi's cottage. I couldn't imagine Papa and Daddy climbing out the window. Thinking about it made the corners of my mouth turn up and twitch, even though I knew I shouldn't smile at such things. Every few hours, Daddy would give us a bit of roti and lentils to eat with a few radishes and a slice of mango. I saved my mango slices wrapped in a cloth napkin so I could eat them all at once before bed. Every time I ate a mango slice, I felt happy for that moment. The more slices, the longer the happiness. When I got my mat ready for sleep, I still tasted the syrupy mango juice on my tongue. Amma whispered in my ear, This was the longest day of my life," he said. I nodded hard and leaned against his bony shoulder. Daddy sat cross-legged and hummed prayers very softly. Papa did stretches. If I thought the quiet was hard, Alma must have been ready to explode. I tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. I was waiting for a chance to talk to Kazi. I was also listening for rioters, for the scrape of shoes on the dirt, the first sounds of yelling growing closer, or the crackle of a torch. I listened for Kazi's knocks. I thought of you too, Mama. I thought about the painting, your painting of the hand with the egg. Maybe you painted it when you were pregnant with us, your belly big, all the windows open, the breeze blowing through the house. Maybe you painted the picture when you were happier than you'd ever been, ever would be. We left this morning when the sun was just starting to peek through the clouds. Alma looked at me nervously. He bit his lip. Daddy patted our hands. It will be okay, she said. Your papa will get us to the other side. And I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Veera.
Sure.
Could you tell us a little bit about why it was this excerpt that you chose?
Well, I wanted to, I read different excerpts at different times. I haven't actually read this part aloud before, because I have 2 or 3 that I read very often when I do readings. But I wanted that idea of, feeling like, is this really happening? Do we really have to leave? Are we leaving our home forever? And also that sort of childlike experience of really not fully understanding the magnitude of what's happening all around you, and just being very focused on kind of the small things that are happening around you, like saving your mango so you have a treat before you go to bed, or not being able to talk. And also, normally Nisha doesn't really like to talk, and now that it's sort of being taken away from her, she's kind of appreciating that freedom that she used to have, all the little freedoms to move around, to do what she wanted, to talk when she did want to talk. And so I think just as her world is getting smaller and changing, which will change, within a day, this is the last moment that they kind of have together before that happens. And you don't know, that idea that you don't know that will be the last moment before that other things happen. That other thing happens. We never know what that last moment is until we look back. So that's really their last moment in their house, not in their house, but in their home area, before everything gets very difficult for them.
Thanks, Veera. Before we launch into the questions, I would just want to tell you what the results were to the polls that we put out.
Okay.
We basically asked if what the age group of our audience. We know now that we have 65% who are between 10 to 13 years old.
Okay.
We know that most of them, 76%, are from Bangalore. They've logged in from Bangalore.
Okay.
And we also know that 29% of them have read the pre-reading of the entry till August 19th, 1947, before today's session. So that's good news.
That's great.
I just want to start off, with a, I know, we got this question during our last session right towards the end. It came in from Debashri Saha Roy, who delivered the letters to Nisha's mother in heaven. Would you like to answer that?
Yes, it's such a great question, because I don't know the answer, but it really makes me think about a lot of things, right? About heaven and what is heaven and what is Mama's experience, and the afterlife and all of that. And wanting to know, this faith that Nisha has, that somehow her mother will see what she's writing in her journal, you know? And I think that Nisha is sort of creating this mother she never knew on the pages of her diary, just in hopes that somehow her mother will see it and know, and she just has that faith. So I'm sort of asking the reader to kind of have that faith that somehow mama is reading this and somehow will know. But how that actually happens, I'm not sure. That's for the reader's imagination.
Nice, thank you. We have a question that's coming from Ms. Padma Arvindan, who's touching on the fact that we've discussed this in the last class also. Ms. Veera, did you have a diary and did you write in the night like in the book? I know you've talked about why it is that you chose the format of a diary, but the second part of the question I thought was interesting. Did you write in the night like the book?
Well, I wasn't certainly under the same restrictions as Nisha. I didn't feel like I had to necessarily hide the fact that I was writing in a diary, but I also wanted to keep it private. You know, I didn't show anybody. I mean, part of a diary, kind of your secret diary, I remember having one that had a little lock on it and I had the key, and it could, you know, you could easily pull it apart if you if you really wanted to, but that was one of my first diaries, and I remember it had this little lock and I had the key and I would open up the diary, but I'm sure I wrote at different times, but probably often at night, because I just wanted that sort of calm private space that we have right before we go to bed. And I wasn't, you know, that's a thing, that's another leap that I'm kind of asking the reader to make, is that Nisha's very insightful and articulate and can kind of write her life as a story. I certainly, my journals from my, you know, age 10, 11, 12 were more like, this friend is doing this and it's bugging me, or my teacher's really hard in school, or I didn't like what we had for dinner. They're not as, they weren't as profound in that sense. So I am asking the reader to kind of go with me on that journey, that Nisha's probably expanding her stories more than a young person might in their diary.
While we figure out Kartika's issues, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so while Kartika logs back on, we have a question from Shiza, who says, food and cooking play a critical role in this story, especially here in India. How does food bring people together, according to you?
Yes, I think food is such a powerful way to bring people together, because it, first of all, it invites people to share a meal together, just basically, right? We all have that practice of sharing a family meal together, centering holidays around gathering around food. We all look forward to the foods we have. I've always been somebody who really appreciated my family rituals. And also because I come from two cultures, right? I have the Indian side of my family, and I usually say the Indian side of my family and the Jewish side of my family. That's how I kind of always thought about it culturally. And so we would have different holidays and different foods, and I would look forward to kind of the way they, you know, the different sides of my family. I really appreciated that, even though I knew it wasn't always typical of what a lot of people around me were experiencing where I grew up. And so, you know, I knew what to expect at, you know, one gathering versus another. And I also just got to taste a lot of different foods that way. And so I think food can be a cultural exploration of identity, of family, of tradition, and then also how somebody eats can really show you what a character is like. You know, sometimes people are sort of tentative or maybe on the, you know, choosier side of food, and sometimes people are like, I'll try anything. And so that really shows you something about their personality. So I think the reason I write about food is not only to kind of express the different cultures that I come from and that the characters come from, but also their personalities around food. And also when you write about food, it's such an easy way to sort of bring the scene alive for the reader, because you're using all those sensory details of how the food smells and tastes and the touch and the textures and the experience of the person making them. And for Nisha, it's a powerful way to express yourself without having to talk. So there's a lot I wanted to do with the food in the book, and I really enjoyed kind of playing with what I could do with it.
Thank you. I think this question came up last time as well, so clearly it's a point that resonates with a lot of us here. The next question we have is from Rasil, who asks, how did you decide what type of person Kazi was? Was there a person like that in your father's family?
Yes. Kazi my father's family did have a cook. I don't think that my father didn't have a close relationship. That was a more fictionalized aspect of the book, whereas Papa is very much modeled after what I imagined my grandfather to be like, and he was also a doctor at the Mir Prakash City Hospital, and his personality I created based on a lot of what my father told me, and then some of my father's personality snuck in there as well, as often fictional characters are usually a combination of a lot of influences and then just the imagination. So Kazi was more coming out of kind of the idea that this would be or could be a situation. But I wanted Nisha to show Nisha sort of having that closer relationship, possibly more of a parental relationship that she sort of wished she had with Papa that she has with Kazi. I also wanted her to leave somebody very close to her. And because the family, with Dadi and Papa that identify as Hindu, they're all going to leave. And so who would she be leaving that she felt really close to, that was sort of like a family member? And so I knew I could do that with Kazi. And that was part of why I wanted to kind of create him for that purpose. But he's not based on an actual character in that way.
Hi, Veera. We have a question from Avyay Agarwal. And his question is Amil dyslexic? Ms. Veera said that all her characters are based on someone in her real life. Is there someone who is dyslexic in Ms. Veera's life?
Yes. Well, so both my kids have struggled with different differences in learning at different points of their life. And so I actually don't sort of answer this that specifically, but he is whatever you think he is. Certainly dyslexia is what I had in my mind, but when somebody has different reading and writing differences, sometimes one thing can blend into another. So it could be dyslexia or other kind of executive functioning issues and dysgraphia issues of how the person is reading and writing. And then some people say, is he on the spectrum? And I say to students, whatever you see is right in the sense of however you're interpreting him. But yes, that's specifically what I had in mind. And I do have sort of personal connections to it that way, but I don't go too into detail just to sort of keep the privacy in that sense of my family, but it's not coming out of nowhere.
Thanks, Veera. That was an interesting response. We have a question that's come in from Ujjwal Kothari, who's keen to ask you, why did not Papa, Kazi, Amil, Nisha, and Dadi stay in India? This Papa is Hindu, and everyone is kind of Hindu. So we know from the last session that you set the family in Pakistan in a village like Mirpur Khas because of your personal experience. But for Ujjwal, would you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So why did they leave is mainly the question.
The question was, why did they not stay in India?
Right.
Why were
Well,
they on the Pakistan side?
right. Well, they were never, so, you know, they were in India before partition. And then when the lines were drawn, they were suddenly found themselves in Pakistan. The sort of ground under their feet changed. So because people and, you know, Muslim communities over the border in the new India and Hindu communities and Sikh communities on the Pakistan side suddenly felt, because of all the tension and riots were breaking out on both sides, usually people suddenly found themselves kind of on the wrong side. So that's really what happened to my father's family and what happened to Nisha's family and many other families, where they just didn't feel safe anymore where they were, sadly. Even though my father's family had been there for generations around that area. So I knew I was more familiar with the stories of that journey from what became Pakistan to India, even though it was originally India, and the direction that they went. And I don't know if if Mama was alive, I'm not sure what decisions they would have made. And so it might have been a different decision. Maybe they felt like they could stay. Sometimes families converted to one religion or another to be able to stay. So all kinds of things happen, but the most typical thing that would happen to them, seen as a Hindu family, was that they would leave. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Veera. We have an interesting question that's coming from Noor Sabarwal. I'm currently struggling with writing a picture book for children and was wondering, how did you make Nisha's character both accessible, meaning relatable to the audience, and mature enough to handle the gravity of her situation?
Well, that was certainly my intent, right? And so you have an idea of your character, you have your goal, and then you just write and you see what happens. And usually that involves other people reading it, giving their opinions, giving you feedback, going back to the drawing board. Often I write characters, that I've heard from other writers that I give my work to. I'm in a writing group, and they give me feedback, or my editor. Sometimes my characters can seem almost a little too knowing or a little older than they actually are. And I'm always balancing that, because I want to sort of give the reader kind of an insightful, in-depth, truthful experience. At the same time, what would a 12-year-old understand, know, and be able to communicate? And so often the characters that I create are characters that have a good sense of kind of how to communicate what they're feeling in the written word, or just sort of in their head as the narrator would follow them. And so I also feel like I can get into my own kind of 12-year-old head pretty easily, because that was a time where I had switched schools and I didn't have a lot of friends at first. It was kind of a more difficult time for me. And I really asked myself a lot of questions about my own identity and the people around me. And so it was a vivid time, and I really remember the way I felt. I'm able to look back at some of the journals I wrote and diaries I wrote and really get into that mindset of that age. So that's what I was trying to do, but it's really up to the reader to decide if I was successful or not. And a picture book is, there's something very specific. A picture book is for younger kids. At the same time, I think there can be this sort of timeless, ageless feeling about it. Those are usually my favorite writings for children, that yes, it's for children, but that it could be for anybody. And really just writing for yourself. What is the book that you would want to read or would have wanted to read when you were younger? I ask myself that question a lot.
Thanks, Veera. That's absolutely enlightening.
Thank you.
We have an interesting question from Avya Agarwal again, saying that if the book pitched for children below 10 years, then why are there so many close to death situations?
Oh, say that again. I don't think I heard the beginning.
He was saying that if the book is pitched for readers below 10 years of age, then why are there so many close to death situations?
Oh, well, that is another thing that I was always balancing. You know, I wanted to write a book about the partition, particularly for young readers, because I did want to try to communicate this history. And I was, you know, in the beginning, I'm writing for an American audience in the sense of people who really have often no connection or very little understanding of this history, kind of starting from there. And then, you know, I hoped that I would have a lot of readers from India, and that was kind of my wish, but I didn't know because I'm American publishing in the US. So I wanted to make sure it was truthful and that, you know, there was kind of a nod to some of the things that could possibly happen in the violent potential of what happened during the partition. There were times in my research where I literally had to stop because what I was reading about or pictures I was looking at were so upsetting. And I didn't put many of those things that did happen in the book. But at the same time, I didn't want to shield the reader from the violence, some of the violence that did happen and the things that Nisha would be experiencing, and sort of showing that range. You know, my father's family was able to get on a train and make it to the other side safely. So they only packed a few bags, they lost everything, their community, their home, but they never faced direct violence. But I do have some extended family members who did experience direct violence, and certainly reading a lot of accounts in the history with that. So I was just trying to balance and hope for the best. Sometimes with young readers, you feel when things are sort of being kind of covered, protected for you, and you're not kind of told the truth of something, it just almost can seem more scary, like, oh, I can't even know about this. This is so scary. So I really was trying to walk that line a lot. And for some people, it might be too much. And for some people, it might be fine. So.
Thanks so much, Veera.
Sure.
I think with that response, that brings us to a close of our session. Thank you so much, Veera, for all your time and all the effort that you've taken. We think that with this book club, it's gotten off to a great start, and we hope that we'll have more such amazing events in the future. And we hope to see you at the physical festival next year.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We also just wanted to tell all of our viewers and everybody in the audience that we have a book club launching for parents and educators next week from September 16th. It's based on the book Reader Come Home by Marianne Wolf. It'll be spread out over 4 sessions. If you think that this is something that your parents would be interested in, if we have parents and educators in the audience, please feel free to check out more details about the upcoming book club on our social media handles. Please do follow our social media handles for more updates on all the events from NLF Online and NLF Imaginary Lines Book Club 2020. We hope to see you on September 16th. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you. See you.